Buenos días a todos y a todas. Karim, Jorge, muchas gracias por la invitación. Es un placer enorme estar aquí en Madrid con vosotros, una ciudad que significa mucho para mí y también por el espacio especial que ocupa Madrid en la historia de la UIT. It was here back in 1932 that the International Telegraph Union and the International Radio Telegraph Union came together. They came together to form what we know now today as the ITU. At that moment, telegraphy and the wireless world of radio were converging, and they were converging often faster than the systems created to govern them. Sound familiar? The decision taken back in 1932 recognized that when technologies change, institutions must adapt, and that international cooperation can be a conduit to that transformation. That same spirit of collaboration brings us here today, to strengthen the bridge between regions to ensure that the future of connectivity is inclusive and resilient. Let me share 3 observations on how we can do that. The first is by making connectivity meaningful. The second is to double down on digital skills. And the third would be to engage in action-oriented dialogue to shape our shared digital future together. So first, before we talk about the future of connectivity, we have to address that existing digital divide. John Giusti shared some figures, whether it's 3 billion that we call the usage gap or 2.2 billion that the ITU says offline. It's pretty clear that we have about a third of humanity that has never, ever connected to the internet. Many communities in Latin America, but also here in Europe, face major barriers, from infrastructure gaps to affordability challenges, to limited capacity, to lack of regulatory certainty. That's also something that came up at the previous panel, and the importance of creating enabling frameworks. Fiber optic cables, mobile networks, data centers, satellite constellations, they form the backbone of global communications and, of course, the modern economy. But infrastructure alone doesn't make connectivity meaningful. In addition to being available to everyone, the internet also has to be affordable. It has to be reliable. It has to be secure, trusted, and fast. The affordability piece is absolutely critical, as some households and small businesses pay more than double the UN Broadband Commission target, which is 2% monthly GNI. Governments and industry both have a role here to play in making connectivity less expensive, reducing the price of devices, and also John mentioned the GSMA Affordable Handset Coalition that the ITU is proud to be part of. Of course, the other issue, lowering tax barriers and also creating that regulatory environment that prioritizes the needs of consumers, or as Jim O'Connor mentioned, what are those regulatory incentives that can be put in place? The ITU brings governments and industry together. And I think somewhere in the crowd we have my friend Bokar Ba, who leads one of our industry groups in the ITU. So we bring the government and industry together, and also other stakeholders from academia, from research institutions, and from civil society. And I think a good example of this kind of collaboration and what it can achieve is our school connectivity work. It's an initiative called GIGA. The ITU works together with UNICEF, and we have an ambition We were thinking about 2030 in the previous panel, so this ambition is to connect every school in the world by 2030. This effort is also supported by the government of Spain, and for that, we're very grateful. So what do we need to do to actually achieve this? The first thing we have to do is figure out where all the world's schools are actually located. And today, thanks to the information provided by governments, also complemented by satellite imagery and artificial intelligence, more than 2.2 million schools have been mapped across more than 200 countries. This data is enabling governments to take action to bring online hundreds of thousands of students that otherwise would have been left behind. My hope, speaking of hope from the previous panel, my hope is that every child everywhere at any time can access safely, underscore the word safely, safely the opportunities and choice that connectivity brings so that they can shape their own future. This is what connectivity of the future has to look like, where schools become the anchors of communities, extending not only access to education, but also creating new economic opportunities for families and small businesses nearby. To help affordable digital infrastructure reach the places it's needed most, the ITU has put together the Partner to Connect Global Coalition. We have set a target to get to 100 billion by the end of this year. So far, we're at 80 billion in terms of commitments and pledges, which are focused on connecting those hardest to connect. And some of you in the room have made commitments and pledges, and if you haven't done so, there's still opportunities to get those commitments in. So coming to my second observation, which was also mentioned by the previous panel. The future of connectivity has to be firmly rooted in digital skills, because when we talk about connectivity of the future, we're really talking about digital agency, whether people can use the technologies, whether they can use them and actually access those opportunities, build livelihoods, and participate actively in the digital economy. Emerging technologies, in terms of the future, 6G networks, artificial intelligence, quantum information technologies. These technologies can either widen inequalities or help close the gaps. How this plays out is actually determined by what we choose to invest in and how we together cooperate. A recent analysis shows that artificial intelligence could deliver significant productivity gains in Latin America, particularly in services, in public administration, in knowledge-intensive sectors, but only when it's paired with investment in skills, emphasis on that skills. And that's why since 2019, the ITU has been supporting many Latin American countries through our blended training program for ICT network managers, which combines online courses with physical hands-on courses to help those rural and remote indigenous communities actually manage technologies to address their specific needs. We've also heard, just a couple weeks ago, we saw the launch of the LATAM GPT, an open source AI model built by and for the region. I think this is a demonstration of regional cooperation with ambition and with purpose. And mindful of how quickly technologies like artificial intelligence are evolving, we have to provide accessible skills training so that people can use them safely and responsibly. This is important, especially for young people, and I appreciate really the minister's comments on the first panel. I think it came across so clearly. We have to make sure that we are protecting young people. ITU put together our Child Online Protection Initiative back in 2008, and it brings together governments, industry, educators, civil society, and children themselves. And it's also why we have advanced an AI skills coalition. We have about 70 partners, many of them from the private sector and some of them here today. And we are delivering training in 13 languages, helping countries build the capacity that they need to shape this technology, not simply consume it. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, dialogue. Let me stress the importance of dialogue in a fragmented world. Kareem, you mentioned debate. Okay, we could say dialogue, we can say debate. We can also say diplomacy, because we can certainly use that diplomacy. I think the good news here is that in 2026, there are numerous opportunities, including here today and next week also in Barcelona. These are opportunities to bring everyone to the table. We talked about that also this morning, and there is a seat for everyone at the table. Regional voices carry more weight when they're coordinated, when they're present, and also when they're practical. And that's why I was so glad to see recently we had our submarine cable resilience summit in Portugal, and it was great. And I think my friends from ANACOM, who were so gracious in hosting us, are here today. But we were also delighted to see such a strong participation of Latin America in that important summit. In a few months, we will gather in the Bahamas for the World ICT Policy Forum. So I think that's also another opportunity for this crowd, but in particular Latin America, to come together and look at charting some important policy directions at that policy forum. And in July, we will host the AI for Good Global Summit. Its next edition. What will be important about this year's summit is it will be back-to-back with the UN Secretary General's Global Dialogue on AI Governance. We also heard this morning about the scientific panel that has just been launched. That panel feeds into the dialogue. The dialogue also will feed into our AI for Good Summit. So I invite you also to join us there. And then, of course, the last big event this year, and we'll come back to Madrid in November, as we heard. But soon after that event, we'll gather in Doha for the ITU Plenipotentiary Conference. And that's a critical moment because that conference will chart the direction of the Union for the next 4-year period. So if you haven't been engaged in the preparatory process, it's not too late. And I think it's a critical moment to make sure that all perspectives are heard, especially from Latin America. We'll be talking about next generation networks, about affordability, about smart, flexible policy frameworks, about building trust, and we need you at the table. Señoras y señores, el futuro de la conectividad es mucho más que intentar hacer redes más rápidas o servicios más sofisticados. Es algo más. El futuro de la conectividad es aumentar las posibilidades para las personas, para las economías y para las sociedades. Trabajando juntos, conseguiremos ampliar las infraestructuras para que las redes lleguen a quienes no están conectados y podremos mejorar la formación para convertir acceso en oportunidad y así abrir puertas para todos y para todas. Madrid ayudó a dar forma a la UIT que conocemos hoy en un momento de gran transformación. Ahora estamos viviendo otra transformación única debido a la inteligencia artificial. Pero nuestro futuro digital compartido es algo que podemos configurar juntos y juntas. Salgamos de Digital Latam con el mismo espíritu de cooperación, de valores compartidos y con un claro compromiso de transformar lo que vendrá después, en América Latina, aquí en Europa y más allá. Muchísimas gracias.